Hey everybody, ronarray here, and I think feeling immortal in Path of Exile feels pretty great. So today I want to showcase my immortal build. The build can literally tank everything in tier 17. For example, red bubbles from Abomination balls are perfectly tankable even when you stand in them. On top of that, build can easily tank all children from Katarina, while staying in place as well, so you can just let them all come to you without any kind of consequences. When it comes to Uber bosses, it can tank a lot of different mechanics as well. For example, balls from Uber Exarch are doing literally no damage to it. You can also tank a slam from Uber Exarch as well, without any kind of issue. Even with back to basics, you're receiving something like a phone call, you can just stand and go outside, and your build will be like perfectly fine. Also, when you will come back, enemies will probably be dead. And I think that's a pretty cool and unique approach to the game itself, because the build plays with very low amount of actions per minute. You don't really need to do almost anything, you just walk around and enemies are dying all over the screen. It's also not that heavy for the eyes, and well, it can tank everything, so it just feels great to be that tanky. So talking about how the build works and how we are getting as much tankiness as possible. The first part is Divine Flash. That's a unique passive that we can get from Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel. Both of them together can give us all damage taken by passive energy shield, but 50% of elemental damage taken is taken as chaos damage. It also provides additional bonus to maximum chaos resistance. Since we are getting all our resistances to 90, it's a pretty nice way how we can move half of elemental to the chaos instead. On top of that, we are using the fourth wall, Devout Chainmail. That's the body armor, that gives us armor also applies to chaos damage taken from hits. That way our armor also applies to 50% of elemental damage that will be pretty much moved to chaos damage. And that way we can just defend ourselves with armor against everything else. On top of that, it also provides regenerate 3% of life per second, and that's a pretty important part as well. So since our armor protecting us from both chaos and elemental damage and from physical as well, we're also using Iron Reflex as passive. It converts all evasion rate into armor. That way we can stack even more armor with our Grace auras and also get better numbers on our defensive skills such as Molten Shell. On top of that, we're also getting 100% immunity from crits, from Armor Mastery passive that will take us. You take 30% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Also from tattoos of Rangakurai Turtle that can give us 5% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. And on top of that, we're also using the Watcher's Eye, with you take from 50 to 60% reduced extra damage from critical strikes while affected by determination. All of that together makes us completely immune to critical strikes altogether. And the next layer of defense is pretty much Defiance of Destiny. That's a pretty cool amulet, because Defiance of Destiny can give us % of missing and reserved life gained before being hit by an enemy. It's a great way how we can regenerate health constantly in almost all situations and avoid dying. On top of that, we're also using Darkseer Shadow's Scepter. That way we're receiving maximum life per level, enemies are pretty much blinded when we are hitting them, and enemies blinded by us have Malediction. Malediction is raising our defenses as well, and is a pretty good tool to survive battle. As the next layer, we are using Valerium Moonstone Ring. It gives us a stun threshold is based on energy shield instead of life, and because of that we can use Blood-Notch Crimson Jewel. That way we can receive 60% of damage taken from stunning hits is recovered as life. On top of that, we can use Immutable Force to get stun and block recovery. You need to get Immutable Force with 961% and higher, so make sure that numbers are pretty much aligned with that. Together with Petrified Blood, we can mitigate a lot of additional damage. The damage will be pretty much recovered from the stunning hits. All of that together with our huge life regeneration, pretty much achieved through a few means. The bonus from fourth wall, the vitality that we can use, and such bonuses as Watcher's Eye, for example, giving us a huge defense against any kind of damage over time. That way, the only way how the build can die is pretty much a one-shot. because one shot can literally kill it immediately. To avoid one shots, we are stacking a lot of resistances together with such bonuses as armor that can protect us from both chaos and elemental and stuff like that. On top of that, you can also use Progenesis, since it's a pretty nice bonus on top, but it's definitely not mandatory, and most of the feats that you can see in the video I did without Progenesis at all. So the last part that I want to comment about is Indomitable Resolve. I think it's a great approach how we can boost our tankiness and survivability much further. It's also not mandatory, but if you can get it, the build will be even tankier, and I wanted to try it as well. It can give us deal 10% less damage and take 25% less damage. So basically it provides about at least 20% of survivability and 25% of effective hit pool, which is pretty nice considering how the build works. On top of that, we also have Anti-Reen, which can give us 1.5% of physical damage prevented from hits is originally rated as life. And it boosts our regeneration heavily as well. On top of it, we are also getting endurance resistances, and as the last part of the defense, we are using Nature Patience. That way we can get Grasping Vines each second while we are stationary, up to 10 Grasping Vines as a character. And then we are taking 1% less damage taken per every Grasping Vine. So 10% of less damage taken in the end. Most of the time you just need to run around and stand in the place that we are feeling comfortable with while doing the damage. On top of that, we are also getting 100% of spell suppression, which is pretty obvious, and getting prevention as well from 50 to 56%, 3 from mastery and 3 from inveterate passive. All of that makes the builds really tanky, and right now it can take almost any kind of punishment. So how are we doing damage in such unusual setup? Well, the main important part that we are using cast when stun support. That way we are getting stunned constantly, and we are casting constantly as well. Every time when monsters are attacking us, they are getting stunned, because we have 0 energy shield and stun threshold is based on energy shield instead of life. That way we can cast our cursors automatically, so both cursors are cast when they are stunned. We can also cast Desecrate automatically as well, creating corpses around us. And the most important part for doing damage is Detonate Dead of Chain reaction. This is the main skill that's getting cast automatically as well when enemies are attacking us. And we are blowing the corpses that we casted with Desecrate automatically as well to do the damage. On top of that, we are also using Molten Shell automatically when they are stunned too, since we don't need any kind of other automation types. We're just using cast when stunned in almost every link source except the auras. It leads to pretty unusual type of gameplay when we are focused on doing damage only when enemies are attacking us consistently. That way, the more enemies we have around us, the stronger they are, like faster they are, more damage that we are doing. The build excels in tier 17s with huge pack size such as Back to Basics, because there's a lot of enemies, they're pretty fast, they're doing a lot of projectiles, they're doing a lot of attacks, and they're pretty strong overall. That way we can cast consistently and kill them consistently as well. So the big question is how to get your maximum energy shield to 0, since we are using the 4th wall, which has energy shield on it. To get your energy shield to 0, you will need to take the Agnostic node. It will make your maximum energy shield 0 by default, and that way the Blood Notch will be able to work properly. However, you will not have mana because of it. So if you will need to use that skill, you will need to set up the life tab for it, so the skill will use your health instead of mana. So that pretty much leads us to the question, how to roll the maps for the build to be as efficient as possible. I generally recommend to roll as many attack speed bonuses on enemies as possible. If they are going to be multiplied by Back to Basics, it's going to be even better. Because when enemies are attacking faster, you are dealing more damage, and it's not really touching your survivability overall. That way, just stacking attack speed almost everywhere for enemies will pretty much raise your damage, and will feel much better for the build, so try to roll in that way. So talking about what kind of stuff we will need to avoid and what can actually kill the build, there are 2 points that can pose some kind of threat for our immortality. First off is no regeneration stuff. since we're pretty much based on regeneration and we constantly need to regenerate life. Complete no regeneration, it doesn't matter from a debuff or a map mod, would be pretty much breaking for the build. So try to avoid no regeneration at almost all costs. And the second threat is pretty much our own corpses. We're creating the corpses with Desecrate automatically. And when we are creating corpses with Desecrate, well, those corpses, when blown up, could do a lot of damage to the build itself. So if you have enemies around you that can pretty much blow corpses up, you need to avoid it. Like, to avoid the whole corpses part. Just try to run around and not standing in place. Because if they're going to blow your own corpses, those corpses can kill you. It's mostly spiders in that regard. And when you can see that red dots on the ground, you need to avoid it if you can see spiders around. That's why I don't really recommend running Abomination, because spiders are pretty consistently there. And if you're running something like Ziggurat, for example, or Fortress, there's usually no spiders at all. So talking about what kind of mechanics you can farm with the build. It's pretty much nice build for any kind of mechanics where a lot of monsters are attacking you. For example, just clearing tier 17 back to basics maps are pretty easy with it. You can also farm something like Shrines or Ambush Scarabs. And on top of that, Ultimatum or Harvest or anything when you have a lot of monsters and not really focusing on single target. Therefore, mostly it works pretty good in mapping itself. It is alright against bosses in tier 17s because they're attacking pretty consistently and doing a lot of movements as well. However, any kind of proper single target against enemies that are probably not attacking a lot would feel not that good. So focus on mechanics that have a lot of monsters and they are going to constantly attack you. It raises a pretty logical question. So can the build kill Uber bosses? Well, the answer is yes, but it will be heavily inefficient. Since Uber bosses are not really attacking you that often, you're not really going to cast that often as well. And since the damage is not too good, especially against single target by itself, you're probably going to stay for a lot of time there. You're not really receiving damage from almost anything that Uber bosses are casting. So you can just tank most of the attacks without any issue. However, since they're not really attacking you that often, it will take a lot of time, and I definitely don't recommend to farm Uber bosses with that build. So doing a quick unique items overview, the most important part is the fourth wall devote chainmail. It will give you armor applies to chaos damage taken from hits, and therefore it will apply to the damage that will be transitioned from elemental resistance. After that, Valerium Moonstone Ring is a decent option too, so try to get it as fast as possible because stun threshold is one of your best defensive mechanics. The Dark Seer Shadow Scepter is pretty important because it can give you life, it can give you survivability and pretty great damage bonus. The Defense of Destiny is pretty nice as well, it will raise your survivability significantly. If you can get one with you can apply an additional cures, it will be just perfect, because that way you will be able to utilize both cures such as Enfeeble and Flammability together. Mage Blood is a decent option as well, if you can afford it, because it can boost survivability even further. However, it's definitely not necessary, if you're not going to be completely immortal. When we are talking about additional stones in the build, Melding of the Flash is a pretty big deal because it raises our elemental resistances. On top of it, Forbidden Flash, if you can get it with Indomitable Resolve, it would be just perfect, because it will give you even more survivability by itself. If not, any kind of other jewels could be used, because they will just give you additional armor and health, if possible. Blood Notch should be around 60%, it's very important, so try to get it exactly around 60. Because that way you will receive almost no damage from stunning hits. Perandus Pact can get you a lot of damage by itself. It's not really calculated by path of building, but it's pretty important to get, because that way you can give 6% increased fire damage to all the nodes around. And since you have a lot of nodes around here, it's going to boost your fire damage significantly. On top of that, Natural Affinity is pretty nice. Try to get one with increased reservation because it's cheap and it's required to get all your auras in. On top of it, you can also use Immutable Force, and just remember to aim for at least 961% and higher, or Immutable Force increase stun and block recovery percentage, because it will raise your DPS significantly. When talking about rares, the only important part is just to get suppress damage and life on it. The helmet is pretty important by itself, so it's probably the most important rare here. On that you will need to roll physical damage from hits taken as chaos, physical damage from hits taken as fire, some reservation, suppress and life. Nothing else is important, but if you can get life regeneration on it, it would be pretty nice. On gloves it's the same, you just need stats, suppress and life. And that's pretty much the same with the boots, so movement speed, suppress, life, and stats together with maybe resistances. As a ring, I recommend to use one with a high stat amount and boosted resistances by itself. And the last but not the least is pretty much your shield. Your shield is here just to boost your damage. And try to get spell damage or fire damage as high as possible. Maybe a level 2 fire spell skill gems could help you as well. The last important part here is +2 to all maximum resistances. It will boost both your chaos resistances and your elemental resistances together. So it's a pretty important stat, and try to just get it together with spell damage and any kind of base shield. And the last part is Glorious Vanity. When you're picking your Glorious Vanity, make sure that you're getting Cult of Chaos there, because 1 to maximum chaos resistance for only 1 point is absolutely amazing. So talking about Flasks, it doesn't matter if you're going to use a Mage Blood or not, the Flasks are the key to half of your survivability. Try to get Ruby Flask or any elemental flasks that you're going to use with Melodion of the Flash, and armor on it would be very helpful. On top of that, Quartz Flask is very recommended, because it will pretty much give you phasing, and that way you will be able to just pass through enemies, and it feels just great in the Vulcan build. It also provides chance to suppress spell damage, and it really helps because the build is not really going to the right part of the tree for it. On top of that, you can use Jade Flask and Granite Flask just to buff your armor as high as possible. Also, Jade Flask is pretty important by itself because it can provide you with additional elemental resistances during the effect. Even if you're not really going to use a Mage Blood and going for Tides of Time instead, it's pretty important to roll your flasks properly. So if you're going for Tides of Time, you will need to get rid of increased effect and buff your stats elsewhere. The passive tree for the build is pretty basic. So we're just starting here and going up, taking Divine Flash from Glorious Vanity bonus. Then we're going to the left and down, pretty much just to reach Iron Reflexes because it's pretty important node. On top of that, we can also use Tattoos here, Tattoos on Gemaku Warrior, to get increased fire damage. After that, we will need a passive mastery for reduced extra damage from critical strikes, because it's pretty important to reach our threshold. Then we are going up, taking Agnostic, and to the right, taking Pain Attunement, because most of the time we are staying at the low house. On top of that, we can also go to the right, taking Instinct, mostly to prevent 3% of suppressed spell damage by itself. We're also taking Heart of Flames for damage and Elemental Overload for damage as well, because it boosts it pretty significantly. I'm also using small cluster jewels here, with Born of Chaos on everyone. You will need at least 2 of them, so 1 here and 1 here. On the jewel itself, just try to roll some resistances, probably Chaos resistance and something that you lack. Most of the time it's going to be Lightning. Everything else is not that important, so just 1 passive here and then Born of Chaos. I'm using the lowest part just to have Forbidden Flame in it, and nothing else is that important. You will also need to boost auras from your skills have increased effect on you because you are using Purity of Fire. That way try to take that master as fast as possible. And 10% of physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage is just amazing, so try to get it to rise your physical damage maximum hit. Ascendancy for the build is very simple. We are taking the basic set of Untiring for life regeneration, which is pretty important for survivability, Unbreakable, because that way we will apply some part of our armor to the elemental damage that are not really transitioned to Chaos, and Unflinching for endurance charges, because it's pretty important to have endurance charges for better physical max hit, and Unrelenting, to just get 8% reduced elemental damage taken without maximum endurance charges. You can take it in almost any order, however I would say Unbreakable is the most important part here, and you will need to take it first. Also important part for boosting your survivability is getting Effect of Shock. So it's pretty important to get Soul of Garruk Khan for used Effect of Shock on you, 60%, and on top of that adding tattoos such as Tattoo of the Valaka Scout. It will get 10% reduced Effect of Shock on you. If you can get at least 4 tattoos like that, together with Garruk Khan, you are going to have 100% reduced effect of shock on you, and in the most cases you will not get bonus damage when you are shocked. So playing the build was pretty much fun, and I think it's a nice end of the league project that I really enjoy doing. Hope you can enjoy that as well, because running around, just walking through your enemies is pretty fun in my opinion. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.